Hello and welcome to Unacademy. A very good morning and welcome to the daily Hindu news analysis. So let's take a look at the topics that we are going to discuss. But before that, we have a few important announcements. Our online classroom program for 2025 has already started from 13th Feb, and we are providing a special discount, and the discount offer ends today. You get a flat 50% along with a 6-month free extension. So please contact the number provided if you're interested to take up the course. Apart from that, we are excited to announce a new initiative exclusively on the Unacademy app. We are going to start NCERT Fundamentals from 19th of Feb, and Sham sir will be covering the basics of Indian economy from NCERT textbooks from class 6 to class 12. These classes shall be live every day from 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. So do catch these sessions live on the Unacademy app. With this, let's begin with the discussion of today's The Hindu newspaper by first looking at the topics that we are going to discuss. From the Delhi edition, I have chosen 11 important articles for a detailed analysis. In fact, today's newspaper is a little interesting. With regard to mains, we have very few articles today. There is only one column, one editorial, which is worthy of discussing, because there are two columns which we have already covered. There is one column in today's paper dealing with elections in Pakistan, and we have already covered it multiple times. There's another article on electoral bonds, and for that we have a detailed session that was done a couple of days ago. So do go back and watch these videos, which is available on our YouTube channel. So today I'll be taking up 11 articles. Most of them are relevant for your prelims, and one article relevant for mains, where we carry out a detailed analysis. So let's begin with this article from page number 8. We look at this editorial that is talking about the ongoing trade negotiations between India and EFTA countries. It is dealing with a specific issue related to trade negotiations known as data exclusivity with regard to drug development. So that is the core topic being analyzed in this editorial. But let's widen the discussion. Let's go beyond the editorial and talk about EFTA, the ongoing trade negotiation. And we should also understand what is a free trade agreement in the first place. And then we'll come to the core topic, that is data exclusivity with regard to drug development. So the context of this editorial is that India is negotiating a free trade agreement with a group of countries known as EFTA, the European Free Trade Association. We had a small discussion on this topic a couple of days ago, where I explained the members of EFTA. So today we'll take a deeper look at the ongoing trade negotiations and what issue has come up between India and the EFTA countries. There is one specific issue related to intellectual property rights as far as drug development, drug production is concerned, and this is holding up the FTA between India and EFTA. Otherwise, reports are indicating that the trade deal is almost finalized, and very soon India and these group of countries are likely to sign this free trade agreement. So first, let's talk about EFTA. Let's cover a few basic facts which could be relevant for your prelims. I'll also explain what is a free trade agreement, why free trade agreements are necessary, and then we'll talk about the core issue. So EFTA is basically a trade bloc in the Europe region consisting of these 4 countries: Norway, Iceland, Switzerland, and Liechtenstein. These 4 European countries have formed the European Free Trade Association. This trade bloc is parallel to the European Union. These countries are not EU members. Please remember that point. Norway, Switzerland, Liechtenstein, and Iceland, they are not members of the European Union, which is the other major political economic grouping of Europe. So this grouping was established in the year 1960. It was established through the Stockholm Convention, and several countries which were not joining the European Economic Community, which was the predecessor of European Union, they formed this parallel organization. See, the EU was established much later. In its current form, the EU was established in 1992, after the end of the Cold War, after the Cold War divide in Europe came to an end. The predecessor organization of European Union is the European Economic Community. So some of the European countries led by France, Germany and others, They had already formed a political and economic union, and they were setting up a customs union, and the Schengen area also had been established. The Schengen area, as we studied yesterday, is a passport-free corridor, a visa-free corridor that allows for free movement of people. The EU countries, which were previously part of European Economic Community, they've also created a common customs and trade union to provide for the free flow of goods between the member countries. But these countries which set up the EFTA as a parallel trade bloc, they didn't want to join the EU, that is the European Economic Community. They didn't want to be a part of the customs and trade union that was being set up by the European Economic Community, because they had some fundamental differences between them. So these countries adopted the Stockholm Convention. It actually included 7 countries initially: Austria, Denmark, Norway, Portugal, Sweden, Switzerland, and even United Kingdom. At that point, these countries were still not members of the European Union. So they established this trade bloc called EFTA. But later, some of these countries left the EFTA and they went on to join European Union. For example, the UK would later join European Union, and subsequently it quit the European Union as well through Brexit. If you look at Denmark, Austria, and few other old members of EFTA, they've all joined European Union today, and they're part of the European Customs Union. But today there are 4 countries which remain as part of this trade bloc: Norway, Iceland, Switzerland, and Liechtenstein. They have not joined EU as full-time members. They are not part of the European Union Customs Union. They have their own trade bloc, which is European Free Trade Association. But another important point here is that, yesterday I mentioned this in the prelims discussion, these countries have joined the Schengen area. Even though they are not members of European Union, they have joined the Schengen zone. They have signed the Schengen Agreement to provide for free movement of people. But free movement of goods is not allowed from EFTA countries to European Union. Is that clear? So there is a trade barrier between EFTA and the European Union. So this is about the European Free Trade Association, or EFTA. Now let's address one basic question. What exactly is a free trade agreement? Why do countries negotiate FTAs? What's the purpose behind it? Now it's important to understand this both from a prelims and mains point of view, because India has prioritized FTAs with many important trading partners. We have recently signed a limited trade agreement with UAE, with Australia. We are currently negotiating many FTAs with the United Kingdom, European Union, and as well as with EFTA. Right? So it becomes important to understand what is a free trade agreement, what purpose does it serve. The primary objective of any free trade agreement is to provide for the free movement of goods and as well as services, investments, and sometimes for the free movement of people as well. It depends on how the FTA is negotiated, what are the objectives of the negotiating parties. The primary goal is always to allow the free movement of goods, and sometimes it includes free movement of services, investments, and people as well. So if free movement has to be achieved for movement of goods, services, investments, and people, it essentially means that there are certain barriers that prevent this free movement. We call them barriers to trade. Technically, they are referred to as barriers to trade. With regard to trade between two countries or two regions, there exist certain kind of barriers which prevent the free movement of goods, services, investments, and people. What are these barriers? There are 2 types of barriers to trade. One, you have tariff-based barriers, which is nothing but the barriers related to taxes. It could be your import duties, custom duties, anti-dumping duties. So all these taxes and duties that are levied on goods and services which are imported, that becomes a barrier to trade. If these tariffs are very high, obviously those products will not be competitive in the market where it is being imported, right? So that becomes a barrier to trade. Now imagine if the tariffs are reduced, if these duties are brought down. Sometimes through a FTA, tariffs are brought down to zero. We call this duty-free access. You might have seen in airports, duty-free zones are established and where certain foreign goods are sold for duty-free, meaning there are no duties levied on it, no taxes levied on it. So when tariffs are brought down, sometimes to near zero, and if it's made duty-free, that provides for free movement of goods between two countries. So this is a major barrier to trade which is tackled through a free trade agreement. FTAs primarily focus on reducing the high tariffs that are present. Apart from tariff-based barriers, there is another kind of barrier which is non-tariff barriers. These are the two types of barriers to trade. Non-tariff barriers will include every other obstacle to trade apart from tariff-related barriers. Apart from the taxes, the duties, whatever obstacles are present, whatever barriers are present, they become non-tariff barriers. So this could include the lack of infrastructure to promote trade between two countries. Let's say between two countries, there is no good connectivity. Let's say the airports, the seaports are not well developed. The physical linkages, the logistics is not well developed. So then you can't expect easy movement of goods to be present between those two countries. So lack of infrastructure could be a non-tariff barrier. Then the policies, laws and regulations of both the sides. If there is no harmony between them, this could become a non-tariff barrier as well. For example, environmental laws, labor laws, competition laws, intellectual property related laws. If these laws, policies and regulations are not in harmony between the two sides, that could become a barrier to trade, a non-tariff barrier. Now let's say, for example, in a developing country like India, we can't enforce very strict environmental standards on our domestic industries. We can't provide for highly progressive labor codes as well, which could become detrimental to our industry, right? Even when it comes to intellectual property rights, usually developing and underdeveloped countries, they are more relaxed when it comes to implementation of intellectual property rights, because patented, copyrighted products are going to be very expensive and poor people may not be able to afford them. So developing and underdeveloped nations have very relaxed laws, policies and regulations. But developed countries, on the other hand, let's say US or Australia or European countries, they expect very high environmental standards. They expect very strict enforcement of IP laws. Since their companies, Western companies, largely own most of the intellectual property, right? They want to monopolize the market and they want others to strictly enforce the IP rights as well. So they expect very high standards of labor codes as well, which may not be possible for a developing nation or a poor country to meet. So this mismatch between laws, regulations and policies between two countries could also become a barrier to trade. So through a FTA, these non-tariff barriers are tackled. An attempt is made to harmonize the laws, policies and regulations to provide for free flow of goods, services, investments, etc. There could be regulations which is governing the flow of investments. If foreign direct investment, institutional investment is coming in into the capital market and into the industrial sector, right? If the regulations are very strict, then there is no free flow of investments. If the laws are not harmonious, the flow of services could also be affected, right? So through a FTA, these non-tariff barriers are addressed. An attempt is made to harmonize these laws, policies and regulations covering many sectors so that there is free movement of goods, services and investments. And sometimes an FTA could also include negotiations related to visa and immigration policies. If the two sides are looking to provide for free movement of people, right, they will address this non-tariff barrier as well. This is also a type of non-tariff barrier. if visa immigration policies are very strict, it prevents the movement of businessmen, traders, students, workers, tourists. So that is detrimental to trade. It's a barrier to trade. It falls under the non-tariff category. It's not related to taxes. So strict visa immigration policies is a non-tariff barrier. So sometimes FTAs can address this as well. They can reduce the restrictions, provide for easier visa process, simplified immigration process. Sometimes they might even agree for visa-free entry and movement. So that will provide for free movement of people. So this is the purpose of any free trade agreement. Understood? The goal is to address the barriers to trade, both tariff and non-tariff barriers, and ensure that there is free flow of goods, services, investments, and people. So this will drive the trade relationship. It will benefit both the sides if the FTAs are well negotiated. The intention should be to benefit both the parties. But if FTAs are not well negotiated, if one side dominates over the other, enforces their policies, their views on the other, then it could adversely affect the other country. It could result in a flood of imports from one side to the other, and the domestic industry in the other country could get very badly hit. So that is a drawback of FTAs. So India has a bitter experience because our FTA with ASEAN countries, with the Southeast Asian countries, it did not perform as expected. India's assessment is that Southeast Asian countries of ASEAN group, they have benefited more from the FTA than India. Because of this FTA, there has been a flood of cheap Southeast Asian products into the Indian market, which has hit Indian farmers, India's MSME industry. Because domestic producers may not be able to compete with the better quality, cheaper foreign products flooding the market through the FTA route. So many concerns do exist with regard to FTAs. There is also a possibility where a third party might misuse the FTA route. Now imagine India and Southeast Asian countries have a free trade agreement. It should be benefiting only Indian exports and Southeast Asian exports. But what if China tries to leverage this? What if Chinese exporters misuse this route, send the goods to Southeast Asian countries and route this to India to escape the trade barriers? So third parties might benefit. So this is where drawbacks come up with regard to free trade agreements. But if it is well negotiated, it can be very beneficial for both the sides. Now coming to the ongoing trade negotiations between India and EFTA. There is a lot of potential that exists over here. Even though it's just 4 European countries, these 4 countries are actually a very big market for India. Norway, Switzerland, Iceland, to an extent even Liechtenstein. There are a lot of exports from India that head towards these 4 countries, which are part of the European Free Trade Association. So today we are negotiating the TEPA, Trade and Economic Partnership Agreement. It is tentatively named as Trade and Economic Partnership Agreement. And most reports are indicating that both sides have almost finalized the deal and we are on the verge of signing the deal. But there is one issue which is holding India back. There is one issue which has caused concern for India. So that is what we are going to discuss next, the last point. But before we look at that, please look at the potential for trade between India and EFTA countries. I've shared a couple of important graphs that shows the trade volume between India and EFTA countries. You can see how over the last 2 decades, there has been a consistent increase in trade volume. There has been a substantial increase in India's exports towards these 4 countries. We've also attracted a lot of imports from these countries along with investments and services that have flowed to India. Now, for example, if you look at, let's say, Swiss chocolate, right? There is a huge market in India. If the trade deal goes through, Swiss chocolate could become very affordable, cheaper, or who knows, it might even become duty-free. Then Norway and Iceland, they're known for their fish, the fish produce. So that is something that could have a big market in India. Similarly, from India, gems and jewelry, India's software exports, right? Agricultural exports, they could all benefit through this trade agreement. And also some of these countries are very strong in pharmaceuticals, especially Norway and Switzerland. They are leaders, global leaders when it comes to biotechnology, pharmaceutical industries, etc. So they have a huge market in India. So that is something they would like to tap into. And India also is seeking investments from these countries. Norway especially is a major investor. There are many Swiss investors as well in the Indian market. So India would be interested in driving more investments and increasing our exports. And these countries are also interested in increasing their exports to India. So there is a lot of potential. There is no doubt about it. There has been a consistent increase in the trade volume. But however, there is one concern which has come up related to intellectual property rights. During the course of negotiations, the EFTA countries have raised an unreasonable demand from India. And India is not able to accept this demand, and India has rejected this demand raised by the EFTA countries. This issue is related to the development and discovery of drugs. As I told you, Norway and Switzerland, they are global leaders in pharmaceuticals. There are many top pharma companies, biotech companies, which are developing advanced drugs, vaccines. They already have a number of products that dominates the healthcare industry, the healthcare market. So obviously for them, India is a huge market, and these companies, they already hold patents on various drugs, therapeutics, etc. Now see, the problem in the field of drug development is that developing a new drug or a new therapeutic is very, very expensive and time consuming. It requires a lot of investment in research and development. Be it any pharmaceutical company or any biotech company, when they are developing a new vaccine, a new line of treatment or a new line of drugs, it will take years and years of effort. Drug discovery is not an easy process. Apart from drug discovery, they have to develop the product and test by conducting clinical trials. I'm sure some of you would know that clinical trials is a very time-consuming process. It will take multiple rounds of testing to ensure the safety of the drug and the efficacy of the drug. So clinical trials will further increase the time duration, and the cost involved in drug discovery, drug development and drug trials is very, very high. So that's one reason why most patents with regard to drugs are held by Western pharmaceutical companies, because they have the kind of capital that is needed to invest in research and development, to carry out innovation, to lead scientific research in the healthcare domain, to find new vaccines, new drugs, to test them out over a long period of time to ensure their safety and efficacy. So they hold most of the patents, and this almost gives them a virtual monopoly over many important life-saving drugs and treatments. Now, obviously, for all the effort they have put in, they would expect some rewards. They would expect the profits to come in. These pharma companies would have invested millions of dollars to drive research and development and innovation. They would have spent years together in developing the drug, in testing the drug, right? So given the high cost, obviously they would look to recover that. So this is where intellectual property rights come in to protect the developers, the originator firm. So patents are granted as an intellectual property right to that company which has developed a new drug, a new line of treatment. These patents are given for a few years. So during this period, that originator firm, the company which developed the drug or the treatment, will hold the patent, thereby giving it a monopoly over that particular market. But let's look at the other side of the story now. For poor countries, developing countries like India or African countries, they cannot afford expensive drugs. Obviously, when patented drugs are sold, these are branded drugs, right? They will be very expensive. They are cost prohibitive. They are not affordable. The question of affordability comes up. Poor people and poor developing countries, underdeveloped countries, they cannot afford these expensive patented branded drugs. So this is where a dispute comes up between developing nations and developed nations over intellectual property rights, specifically related to drugs and pharmaceutical products. The inventors would obviously expect returns. There's nothing wrong with that, right? They would have invested years of effort, millions of dollars in research and innovation. Or else, if they don't have a patent, if they can't hold the monopoly for some years, What is the incentive for them to invest in research and innovation? If intellectual property is not guaranteed, right, then there is no incentive for research and development, no incentive for fresh innovation to happen. So you can't have a situation where these companies are not protected, their commercial economic interests are not protected. It is very essential. At the same time, it is also essential to make the drugs affordable, especially when it comes to life-saving drugs and life-saving treatments. This is a question of humanity. It's a question of uplifting the weaker sections. So this is where the standoff comes up between affordability of drugs and the issue of patent ownership. Now, under the WTO, this issue has been resolved to an extent through the TRIPS arrangement of WTO. TRIPS deals with trade-related intellectual property rights. So, under the TRIPS arrangement of WTO, a balance has been struck between the two conflicting objectives. On one hand, patents are granted, intellectual property is protected through the TRIPS agreement of WTO. So, this ensures that the interests of the pharma companies is protected. It ensures that research and development is incentivized, innovation is protected. At the same time, under WTO TRIPS, there is a provision called compulsory licensing, or CL. Governments have the authority to issue a compulsory license to their domestic pharma companies to produce non-branded generic drugs when it is necessary in the interest of the healthcare of the public. In the interest of the healthcare of the public, if there is a very expensive patented drug which is not affordable, then governments can issue a compulsory license which will allow their domestic pharmaceutical firms to produce the generic copies, the generic variants of these patented drugs. These are non-branded drugs, and India is a leader. India is one of the leader when it comes to producing generic drugs and vaccines. India is known as the pharmacy of the world for this particular reason. India has a very vibrant pharmaceutical industry, and we produce one of the world's largest volume of generic drugs and vaccines. So this is where a direct standoff comes up between these developing countries and the developed countries, between India and some of the developed nations. Now, since India often promotes the production of generic drugs, developed countries have a problem with this. The developed nations, they want to protect their pharma companies, they want to protect their commercial interests because they've invested millions of dollars, they've invested years of effort. But from India's point of view, we want to keep the drugs affordable. We want to ensure the masses have access to life-saving drugs and treatments. So we make use of compulsory license and we allow the domestic companies to produce the generic copies, the generic variants of these patented drugs. So in the current ongoing negotiations between India and EFTA countries, the EFTA countries have raised a new legal demand. In fact, in the world of international negotiations, there is a new legal innovation which has happened with regard to intellectual property rights. A new principle has been brought up. It's called principle of data exclusivity. Principle of data exclusivity essentially means that the developer, the originator firm, will control the data as well related to a particular drug or a product. The data related to the trials. The data related to the trials is also controlled and protected under this interpretation of intellectual property system. Now, let's say, for example, in India, a generic company wants to produce a copy of a patented drug. For that drug to be approved for commercial usage in India, right, the regulator has to provide the approval. In India, the regulator is the CDSO, the Central Drug Standards Control Organization. Now, let's say an Indian pharmaceutical company is looking to produce a generic variant of a patented drug, and it has to approach CDSO for approval to release the drug and provide for commercial usage. But to do that, to get that approval, it has to rely on clinical trials, the data from clinical trials. And these companies which are producing the copies, they will not have access to that data. This data is owned by the originator firm. Previously, when the generic firm pays a royalty to these companies and purchases the the formulation for making the generic copies. They only provide the formulation, but they don't share the clinical trial data, right? But if required, generic companies could have procured the data because there was no restriction, no prohibition on that. But now EFTA countries are demanding that the clinical data trials, the data related to the trials, should be protected under the trade agreement for a period of 6 years, which means the clinical trial data will not be shared with the generic companies. And without this trial data, there is no proof for safety and efficacy of the drug, and hence drug regulators will not grant approval for those generic drugs. Understood? So a generic company in India, right, it would have bought the patented drug, the formulation. Previously, they were selling the clinical trial data as well to us. So by using the trial data, which shows the safety and efficacy of the drug, they would conduct some local trials as well. And using that as backup data, they would present this to the regulator, the CDSO. And CDSO would grant approval for its commercial release. But now what these companies are saying, these developed countries are saying, is that there should be a protection for clinical trial data. We'll not release this data for 6 years. Which means even if we can make generic copies of the drug, we will not have the data to back up the safety and efficacy, which means the regulator will not be able to grant approval. So this could put a big constraint on India's generic drug industry, and it could hamper the production of generic drugs. So this could weaken our healthcare system. And not just India, it could affect many other countries, because many developing countries, poor nations, they depend on India for accessing generic drugs which are affordable. In fact, India is like the backbone of Africa's healthcare system. Most African countries rely upon generic vaccines and drugs produced by Indian companies. If these restrictions come in because of EFTA trade deal, then we will not have access to the clinical trial data, which is protected under the principle of data exclusivity. So the originator firm which developed the drug, they will retain exclusive control over the clinical trial data. They'll not release it into the public or into the hands of the generic companies. They will have complete monopoly for at least 6 years. So this is something that India finds to be unacceptable. We can understand their position, but India can't accept this demand, and this is where the issue has come up. According to reports, Indian negotiators have rejected this demand. India has said that we can't accept the principle of data exclusivity. If we do this, then our generic companies, our pharma companies, will not have access to the clinical trial data, and we can't release the generic drugs in India. So that could affect our healthcare system. It will affect the poor people. It will affect many other poor countries, underdeveloped countries that are depending on India, as India is a major exporter of affordable generic drugs and vaccines. So this is where the standoff comes up between India and the EFTA countries. So now what is the way forward? The way forward would be to protect India's generic industry as of now. That is, of course, the right approach, the short-term approach. At any cost, India will not agree to such demands. Such issues have come up before as well. Even with US and other European countries, there have been issues where India had issued compulsory license for certain life-saving drugs. But those countries dragged India to the WTO and filed a dispute against India, saying that India is resorting to unfair trade practices. So India has an experience with such cases. So India will never it'll never accept any such imposition of these rules or principles which could hamper our domestic industry, particularly in the healthcare domain when it comes to drug development. So the short-term approach would be definitely to hold the strong position, saying that we'll not accept this, and whether this will completely rupture the trade deal, that is left to the EFTA countries, right? Or some solution, a short-term solution can be found if both sides are ready to meet at a middle ground. But otherwise, as a long-term plan, India should build up its domestic pharmaceutical industry. It's high time we stop relying on patented drugs and foreign developed drugs. During the COVID-19 pandemic, India's pharma industry and biotech industry, they did phenomenally well, right? Be it the indigenous vaccine that was developed and the mass production of the COVID vaccines that India carried out. We supplied vaccines to the world. from testing and diagnosis to vaccination and treatment. India led the world during the pandemic, and it shows that India's healthcare sector, the biotech industry and the pharma industry have enough resources and expertise. So now they need a better push from the government so that we start producing these drugs, these raw materials and APIs from scratch in India without depending on Western pharmaceutical companies or foreign countries. We have to develop non-expensive solutions from scratch in India. We can develop novel technologies, but for this, support is needed for backing fundamental research, basic research in drugs, to bring out new molecules, to develop APIs or active pharmaceutical ingredients, which is the core raw material in a drug. Right? Currently, we rely heavily on foreign companies for APIs. Even though India is the largest producer of generic drugs, most APIs are coming from China. Most active pharmaceutical ingredients, almost 60% of it, is imported from China. Right? So this has to end. We need to think about the long term, and we have to start focusing on developing new drug molecules, new therapeutics, and conduct our own trials as well in order to reduce our dependency on other countries. So that is the way forward in the long term. But in the short term, definitely India is not going to accept what EFTA countries are saying. The principle of data exclusivity will hurt India's generic drug industry, and it could impact our healthcare system. So India has said no as of now. So we need to wait and watch what will happen in the coming days. So this was the important topic, the only important editorial that we had today. The other two columns, as I told you, one is related to Pakistan's elections, the other to electoral bonds. But since we have covered it repeatedly, we are not going to discuss that. You can go through the articles and watch these videos if you want. Also, please note, this is the schedule for today with regard to our special classes, which is available for free on the Unacademy app. These are the topics and those are the timings. The links for these videos are provided in the video description. Now let's head towards the prelim section, because today we have a number of small articles which are very important for your prelims. Let's start with this article on page number 1. This article is related to the Congress party and its accounts, which have come under the scrutiny of the IT department. The topic itself is not relevant for us. The article is not relevant for us. But this article is referring to a word called Lien. So it's important to understand what is this word, what does it mean in the banking system. The term Lien is used in the banking system, so you should understand what is it. There could be a prelims question or even a 10-mark mains question based on it. Let me explain this with an example so that you can understand the concept, and then you can take a look at the definition. Now let's say I have borrowed loan from a bank. I have applied for a loan and I have borrowed loan from this bank. Obviously, the bank will not just give me a loan. They will expect some collateral. To ensure that the loan is guaranteed, they will expect a collateral from me. So I might pledge a site, my home, or some gold or a FD deposit that I have, right? I would have pledged something as a collateral to this bank in order to get a loan. So this particular bank, let's say A is the customer. This particular bank is giving loan to customer A, and to guarantee the loan, they would have taken something as a collateral from the customer, right? The customer would have pledged some asset as a collateral. The asset could be anything. It could be a house, a real estate property, gold, fixed deposits, etc. Right? Now, this particular asset is under the claim of the bank. Once the asset is pledged as collateral, even though the asset is owned by the customer, the bank will exercise a lien on the asset. Lien is nothing but it's a control, a claim over the asset which is pledged as a collateral. So the customer cannot go and dilute the asset or liquidate the asset when the loan term is still pending. When the loan is not fully paid back, customer can't go and sell that site. Let's say he has pledged a site, a real estate property or a house. Now the bank will have a lien claim on it. So customer can't go and sell this property to someone else even when the loan is still pending, the dues are still pending. So this claim of the bank, this legal claim of the bank on the asset owned by the customer who's taken a loan, that is called as a lien. Is that clear? Let's say, I'll give you one more example. Let's say I have bought sovereign gold bonds, I have invested in fixed deposits. These are my assets, but I want a fresh loan to fund some new business of mine. So I approach a bank, I take a loan. So they will ask me for a collateral, something that can guarantee the loan. So I will pledge these gold bonds and FDs. Even though it's under my ownership, I own the FD, I own the property, I own the gold bond, the bank will raise a lien on it. They will have a legal claim on it. What is the claim? The claim is that I cannot dilute them. I can't sell. I can't liquidate them. I can't withdraw my FD. Even if I go to a bank and ask for its withdrawal, they will not provide the withdrawal because the lending bank would have already placed a claim on it, which is called a lien. It is still your asset. You still own the asset. You're still the owner. But you can't liquidate it. You can't sell it to someone else because the loan is still pending. You had pledged this as a collateral to the bank, and now the bank has raised a legal claim on it, which is called lien. Understood? It's a very important concept in banking. So there could be a straightforward prelims question. So please go through the other points that I've added here. It explains what is a lien and how does this concept work in banking. If you can understand this example, it's more than sufficient. Next, on the same page, the Hindu carries an image. It is depicting women from Assam, from the Karbi Anglong region, and they are carrying broom grass. They're carrying a type of grass on their back, which is called the broom grass. So there are two important topics which is relevant for our exam. One, what is broom grass? Why is it important? Next, where is the Karbi Anglong region located? What is important about Karbi Anglong region? These are the two things we have to discuss. See, broom grass is of high value. It's a commercial cash crop. Broom grass is nothing but the grass which is dried and used in making of brooms, in making jadu, right? So it's a cleaning equipment used in India and around the world. And the grass for this is broom grass. The best part about this grass is that it is non-perishable, it is perennial. What do you mean by that? It means it grows throughout the year. It's a perennial crop. Once you lay the grass, right, you just have to harvest it during the harvest season. The crop will remain as a standing crop. It's very easy to maintain. You don't have to recrop the grass again and again. It's a perennial crop that stands and it's non-perishable. When the grass is harvested by cutting it, it's later dried and it's a non-perishable product which is used in broom making, and it's also used in many other commodities from carpets to other upholstery equipment which is made. Right? It has a huge application in the interior industry as well. Right? It's a very high value commercial product. It's a cash crop that can bring very good income for the farmers. It is usually grown in hillside areas or even in riverside areas. And the best part is that it can be cultivated under different soil conditions and under different climatic conditions. It will grow very well, be it in sandy soil or loamy soil. Because of its high value in the broom making industry and in the interior industry, right? It's a good commercial crop, a cash crop for the farmers, and it can be cultivated very easily in different soil types, from sandy loamy soil to clay loamy soil. It is a crop that requires very little financial input. The inputs required is very low, be it fertilizers, pesticides. It can be easily cultivated by the remaining stock or the seeds, right? So farmers need not invest too much on the inputs that are needed. So it's a low investment, high output crop, which is perennial and non-perishable and easy to cultivate across different terrains. You find this cultivation specifically in hillside areas and riverside wetlands. These are seen as ideal places. It can even be grown in degraded land, in land which has undergone degradation. That's the best part. Is that clear? So it's very beneficial for the farmers. And which state is the largest producer of broom grass in India? It is Assam. Assam is the largest producer. Please remember this. Very important fact. Given its commercial value and its importance for the rural economy, right? There could be a question. It can be grown under different soil conditions, from sandy loam to clay loam. It can be cultivated in regular farmlands, wastelands, degraded land, wetlands, hillside areas. So it can be cultivated across different terrains. It is in fact grown in Nepal as well, in parts of China, Cambodia, Vietnam as well. But India is also a top producer, and Assam in India is the largest broom grass producing state in the country. And Karbi Anglong is the largest producer in Assam. Within Assam, Karbi Anglong region is the largest producer. So it is cultivated by many indigenous ethnic tribal communities. If you look at the Karbi Anglong region, you have the Karbi Anglong tribe, the Tiwa tribes, the Kasi from Meghalaya region, from Garo, Kasi, Jaintia region. So across this belt of Assam and Meghalaya, many tribal communities cultivate this grass. So as a result, the crop becomes very, very crucial for their sustenance, for their livelihood. Is that clear? So this was about the broom grass. Now let's talk about Karbi Anglong. Karbi Anglong is one of the largest districts in the state of Assam, located over here, and it's home to the Karbi community. They are in majority here. The Karbi tribe, they are in majority. There are other tribes present as well here, like the Tiwas, there are Hummers, there are few Kukis as well, right? So different tribes and ethnic communities are also found, but majority population is that of the Karbi community. Now the Karbis had their own insurgent movement going on a few decades ago. In the Karbi Anglong region, violent insurgency has been seen. A few armed Kargi groups, they had taken up insurgency against India. Some were fighting a separatist movement. They wanted to break away this region to form a separate country. So this was rooted in Karbi nationalism, right? They wanted to break this region away under the separatist movement and form a separate state, a separate country for themselves. Some of the armed groups were demanding statehood. The Karbi tribe has alleged that they have been discriminated by the Assamese, the majority Assamese in Assam. So they were asking for a separate state within India, some of them. Some armed groups were fighting for carving the region out to form a separate state away from Assam. But some armed groups were asking for constitutional status and autonomy under the 6th schedule. Under the 6th schedule of the constitution, some of the armed Karbi groups were asking for autonomy, constitutionally guaranteed autonomy, so that an autonomous district council could be set up. So finally, this demand has been fulfilled. In 1990s, the Karbi Anglong region was provided with constitutional autonomy by establishing an autonomous district council. We spoke about this recently when we discussed the protests in Ladakh, how people of Ladakh are also demanding autonomy under the 6th schedule. So there I had mentioned that there are 10 autonomous district councils in Northeast India, and Karbi Anglong is one of them. So the Karbi Anglong region has constitutional autonomy guaranteed under the 6th schedule, and there is a history of violent insurgency over here. Some insurgent groups have fought for nationalism and separatism. Some insurgent groups have fought for separate statehood within India, and some have fought for constitutional autonomy. So India has tackled the insurgency, and we have satisfied some of the demands by granting constitutional autonomy under the 6th schedule. Now coming to the next article on page number 4. The article refers to the disaster vulnerability of Himachal Pradesh, how vulnerable it is to different kinds of disasters. And despite the vulnerability, the state has shown great resilience with regard to its economic growth. The state's economic survey has been released prior to the budget. And according to the state government, Himachal Pradesh has grown, its GDP has grown at an impressive rate of 7.1%. This is despite all the major disasters that have hit Himachal Pradesh in the last 1 year. Himachal Pradesh is located on a very sensitive location, right? It's part of the Himalayan region, the Himalayan belt. It sits on an active tectonic seismic zone. So it is highly prone to earthquakes and even landslides. Apart from that, Himachal Pradesh is also prone to cloudburst events, avalanches, and flash floods. So Himachal Pradesh is one of the most disaster-prone states in India. It's almost comparable to Uttarakhand, Odisha, and others. Almost every year, Himachal Pradesh will witness cloudburst events, floods, and flash floods. This causes enormous destruction across the river plains and the drainage basin of Himachal Pradesh. It is also at great risk of high-intensity earthquakes. It suffers from frequent landslides and avalanches as well. So there is significant impact of these disasters on the economy of Himachal Pradesh. Right? There is loss of life, loss of property, loss of infrastructure as well due to these disasters. So please look at the vulnerability map. Look at how majority of the state is under the high risk or very high risk category. This whole stretch covering Kulu, Shimla, Kannur sector is a very high risk zone, highly prone to earthquakes, landslides, avalanches, floods. The other areas, Lahul Spiti Valley and this region over here, the lower Shimla, Mandi, Kangra region, this is a high risk area for disasters. So that is the vulnerability profile. Despite being so vulnerable, despite being hit by so many disasters, the state has shown great resilience. At least the state's economy has shown resilience and has registered a 7.1% GDP growth. So that is one key point we take away from this article. Next, on page 12, we have an article referring to an elephant corridor called Deopahar Elephant Corridor. Please make a note of this. Very important for environment ecology. Deopahar Elephant Corridor. Where is it located? It is located in the state of Assam. It is in news because near this elephant corridor, there is an oil refinery, a very important and quite popular oil refinery, the Numaligarh oil refinery, present over here in Assam. Right next to it, you have this forest area, the Deopahar forest region. Now it has been set up as a reserve forest. It's being set up as a reserve forest. See, what happened here was, at Numaligarh, there is an oil refinery, which is a major oil refinery that supplies oil not only to India, but even to Bangladesh. All right? It produces diesel in particular. So, the National Green Tribunal had passed an order asking this oil refinery to strike down a wall it had built, which was restricting the movement of elephants in this critical elephant corridor. As you know, in Assam, there are important protected areas from Kaziranga to Manas and many others. So there are important wildlife corridors through which elephants, tigers and rhinoceros, they migrate from one protected area to the other. So National Green Tribunal had ordered the Numaligarh Refinery Limited to strike down this wall, this barrier that they had created, which was affecting the movement of elephants. So following this order of National Green Tribunal, the oil refinery had approached the Guwahati High Court. Now Guwahati High Court has upheld the NGT ruling. It has refused to provide relief to the oil refinery and it has upheld NGT's orders that this compound wall which was built has to be destroyed because it is affecting the movement of elephants. So please make a note of Deopahar Elephant Corridor. It's very important. And the Numaligarh refinery is also in news because of a oil pipeline that was recently built between India and Bangladesh. That's another related point. Just last year, India-Bangladesh have inaugurated the Friendship Oil Pipeline, India-Bangladesh Friendship Pipeline. India-Bangladesh Friendship Pipeline. This supplies oil, essentially high-speed diesel. High-speed diesel is supplied from the Numaligarh refinery to Siliguri, and the pipeline starts from here, from Siliguri, and reaches Bangladesh. It goes up till Parbatipur in Bangladesh. So India is supplying reliable, low-cost, high-speed diesel, which is crucial for transportation vehicles. So this diesel that we are supplying through the Friendship Pipeline, it comes from Numaligarh refinery. Is that clear? Since it was inaugurated last year, this could also be important for our prelims. Next, we have an article related to Defence Acquisition Council. The Defence Acquisition Council is chaired by the Defence Minister. This is the highest procurement body in the Defence Ministry for approving the procurement of arms and weapons. To modernize the Indian Armed Forces and to procure the new age weaponry, the final approvals come from the Defense Acquisition Council, which is headed by the Defense Minister. So this council has approved defense contracts worth around 84,560 crore rupees. So through this contract, which has been approved, India will be procuring new torpedoes for the submarines that we procured from France, the Scorpion class. The Scorpion class submarines, which are diesel electric submarines, they have been inducted into Indian Navy as the Calvary class. So France supplied the technology to India. It transferred the diesel electric submarine technology to India, and these 6 submarines were indigenously built at Mazgaon Dock Limited. So all the 6 have been inducted into the Indian Navy and under the Calvary class. So for these submarines, new age heavy torpedoes are being procured. Apart from that, the Indian Air Force is looking for new maritime reconnaissance and patrol aircraft. Most likely, it is going to order a huge consignment of C-295 aircraft from Airbus, which is produced in Spain. Recently, this technology has been transferred to India and it will be produced domestically because the focus is on Atmanirbhar Bharat, on Make in India. So all these deals which promote defense indigenization have been prioritized and approved by the Defense Acquisition Council. Even a few supplements needed for MH-60 Romeo helicopters, which we are procuring from the US. These MH-60 Romeo helicopters, they are mainly used for maritime surveillance, anti-submarine warfare, and to procure few components and spare parts, a deal has been approved by the Defense Acquisition Council. So just be familiar with these defense platforms of India that we have procured from other countries, and who chairs the Defense Acquisition Council. It is chaired by the Defense Minister. Next, there's an article related to the Chabahar Port and India's participation in an important regional conference on Afghanistan. As you know, Afghanistan is going through a lot of crisis ever since Taliban took over the country in 2021. India has not yet recognized the Taliban government. In fact, except for China, no country has given official recognition to the Taliban regime. But however, recently Taliban had organized a regional dialogue in Kabul, and it had invited some regional powers to participate. So India was one of the participants. India had sent a technical team where few Indian diplomats engaged with diplomats from other countries in the region to discuss the situation in Afghanistan, and we have started engaging with Taliban. We are at least talking to Taliban. Now, parallelly, there was a regional conference called in Kyrgyzstan. At the capital of Kyrgyzstan, Bishkek, the national security advisors and their deputies from important regional countries were invited for this summit, for this regional conference on Afghanistan. So many countries participated, like Iran, Russia, Kyrgyzstan, of course, which was the host, Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan, and as well as India. From India, it was the Deputy National Security Advisor who represented India, Vikram Misri, who was the Deputy NSA, represented India. And during this interaction on stabilizing Afghanistan, he has urged all the Central Asian countries to use the Chabahar Port in Iran, built by India, to improve regional connectivity and economic opportunities. This would help Afghanistan as well. This could help stabilize Afghanistan and connect Afghanistan with India and Central Asia. This route could connect India with Central Asia as well. So India has stressed upon the importance of the Chabahar Port, which India has built, and it has urged Central Asian countries to start using this for trading with India. So this is where the strategic Chabahar Port is located. Right? It's present at the opening of Gulf of Oman, right next to the Hormuz Strait. This is the Hormuz Strait. And it's just few kilometers away from Gwadar Port in Pakistan. Right? In the Balochistan province, you have the Gwadar Port, which has been built by China as part of its China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, as part of its Belt and Road Initiative. So just a few hundred kilometers away from Gwadar, India has built the Chabahar Port in Iran. And India's grand ambition was to use this route to connect with Afghanistan and further with Central Asia. When there was a civilian government in Afghanistan from 2001 to 2021, during those 20 years, India had invested around $3 billion. We took up many key projects, including this highway that you see here from Zaranj to Delaram. this important highway, which would connect with Kabul, this highway was built by India with Indian assistance. Right? Indian companies had executed this project. So from here, India's plan was to connect with Zahedan, which is a border town in Iran, located on the other side of the border. On the other side, you have Zaranj in Afghanistan, till where India had built a road. So the plan was to connect this with Zahedan and build a railway line that would link with Chabahar Port in Iran. So this was India's ambition, to establish connectivity not just with Iran, but also with Afghanistan and Central Asia. Because accessing Afghanistan and Central Asia has been a challenge for India because of the presence of Pakistan. Pakistan would never give us transit access, right? Given the state of relations, Pakistan would never give us access to connect with Afghanistan and Central Asia. And more importantly, even if Pakistan gives access, it's not a reliable route. Who knows if terror groups might target the transit route? Or what if Pakistan suspends the route someday because of tensions between the two countries? So connectivity via Pakistan has never been a reliable option for India. So India came up with this strategy of developing Chabahar Port in Iran as a viable route to connect with Afghanistan and Central Asia. But right before this route could be fully completed, in Afghanistan, the government was thrown out, Taliban has taken over, and our ties with Iran also has been very badly affected. Our ties with Iran has been affected, and Iran even dropped India out of the Chabahar railway project. India was dropped out by Iran as there were relations, as the relations between India and Iran took a hit after India followed the sanctions on Iran imposed by the United States. The US forced India to follow the sanctions on Iran, and as a result, Iran cancelled the railway project, the Chabahar railway line project, and since then, this route has not been very certain. So now India is trying to use the opportunity. Since the regional countries are interested in stabilizing Afghanistan, India is urging the Central Asian countries to rely on Chabahar Port. Today, we are improving ties with Iran as well, and this still has great opportunity to connect India with Iran, Afghanistan, and Central Asia. Next, a small development from the US on page 13. The US House of Representatives has passed a bill, the China-Tibet Dispute Bill. Please remember this. Through this bill, the US is exerting pressure on China to negotiate with Tibetan leaders, to negotiate with the envoys of Dalai Lama, who's the religious figurehead of Tibetan Buddhists. As you know, China annexed Tibet by force in 1950. It crushed an uprising in 1959, and since then Tibetan Buddhists have been pushed out of the region. They have taken refuge in India, right? So Dalai Lama has been sheltered in India along with all the Tibetan Buddhists. They have been given refuge status in India, and they have been lobbying for liberation of Tibet. They have been still trying to highlight the liberation of Tibet cause, and India has even allowed a parallel Tibetan government to function. There is a Tibetan government in exile at Dharamshala in Himachal Pradesh, and some of the envoys of Dalai Lama, they keep meeting Western governments and Western leaders for support. The US has always used this issue to pressurize China, and now the US House of Representatives has passed a bill called China-Tibet Dispute Bill, which urges China, which pressurizes China to talk to the representatives of Tibet, which is basically Dalai Lama and his envoys. So this is a strategy of the US to put pressure on China by leveraging the Tibetan issue. So please be aware of this. Next, we have another article on the same page related to the Munich Security Conference. Munich Security Conference, it's an annual security dialogue held at Munich in Germany. It brings together many governments, many private companies, think tanks, media, and all these experts. They come together every year to discuss important security issues and geopolitical issues that are affecting the world. So according to this article, several tech companies have come together, from Microsoft to Apple to OpenAI and others, to regulate AI technology which can be potentially misused to manipulate elections. Yesterday we were talking about deep fakes and how generative AI can be used to spread false information, fake news and rumors. So potentially deep fakes and AI manipulated media can be misused for electoral manipulation. So many tech companies and private companies have come together at the Munich Security Conference to come out with a solution to prevent the misuse of AI for manipulating democratic elections. So what is the Munich Security Conference? It's essentially a diplomatic security dialogue where many government leaders, diplomats, security officials, right? Then strategic experts, journalists, then many private companies as well. They all come together at this annual gathering to discuss important security issues affecting the world. Next, we have a reference to Sokol oil that India procures from Russia on page number 14. So there could be a prelims question. India procures Sokol oil from which region or from which country? India procures this variety of oil from Russia. And this oil is extracted in the Sakhalin Peninsula, in the Sakhalin region over here, located in the Far East region of Russia towards the Pacific, the North Pacific. Here you can see the Siberia region of Russia, which is the Russian Far East. And off the coast of Siberia, in the North Pacific Ocean, there is this peninsula called the Sakhalin Peninsula. It's quite close to the Arctic region. It's very close to Japan. You can see the Sea of Japan, Sea of Okhotsk and Pacific Ocean over here. So this peninsula is rich in oil reserves, in hydrocarbon reserves. And India has big investments over here. India's OVL, ONGC Videsh Limited, has invested with Russian companies to extract oil and gas from the Sakhalin reserves. Is that clear? So after the Russia-Ukraine war began and Western countries imposed sanctions on Russia, India has been one of the biggest buyers of Russian oil. Russia has been selling oil at a discounted price, and India has been more than happy to lift the cheaper oil from Russia, thus saving India's expenditure. India's import bills have gone down. But Russia has become the top oil supplier in the last few months, in the last one and a half years. Russia has overtaken even Saudi Arabia and Iraq to become the top oil supplier to India. So most of the oil that we procure comes from here, from the Sakhalin region. And this variety of oil, this type of oil we procure, which is a light, sweet, crude variety, it's called the Sokol oil. All right. The other issue is that we have faced issues with payments. India tried paying for this in Indian rupees, but Russia doesn't have a need for Indian rupees. The Indian rupee is not fully convertible. It's not useful for Russia outside of India, but Russia doesn't have much of imports from India. So Russia insisted that India should pay with other alternate currencies. We have tried paying in UAE dirhams. We also tried paying in Chinese yuan. But as India-China tensions escalated over the border dispute, India has ordered the companies, the oil companies, to not use the Chinese yuan, to not depend on the Chinese currency while paying for Russian oil. So instead of Chinese yuan, we are largely relying on UAE dirhams to pay for Russian oil imports. So please know what is the Sokol oil, where it is extracted from. So this completes my detailed discussion of today's The Hindu newspaper. We had only one editorial which required a main detailed analysis. The rest were small topics, but there were very interesting linkages which could help in our prelims questions. So please take a look at the mains practice questions that I've given for you. You can make a note of them and use them for your answer writing practice. So this concludes my discussion for today. I hope you guys have liked the session. I hope you have understood all the topics. Do let me know how it went in the comments. Do press the like button and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. That is it for today. I'll see you tomorrow. Thanks for watching.